Yesterday, I did an FA wishlist video talking about what I want out of the new 5 FA cards that are being revealed. By the time that this video goes up, there's a very strong chance that 2 of them are going to be leaked, possibly 5 of them, but we'll have to see how that goes. But at the time of making this video, none of those cards have been revealed. And one of the things that I did in that video was I asked you guys how you would fix FAs. What cards would you give them in those 5 new cards to sort of make the deck a lot better? And this is a question that comes up quite often for me because I play a lot of bad decks, I play a lot of rogue decks. Not that there's a huge difference between those sometimes, but I play decks that aren't really meta, and what happens is that a lot of times they're missing like 1 or 2 things to be truly like a tier 1 powerful deck. And people ask me all the time, well, how would you fix this deck? And I usually say something they don't quite agree with, because I feel like when you ask the average person, how would you fix this bad deck, usually the response is just give them a monster of the blank type, and the blank in that case is going to be whatever the newest summoning mechanic is. So for example, a couple years ago, and this was ridiculous as well because pendulums really don't go into decks without pendulum monsters in them already, but a lot of times you'd be like, okay, how do you fix like ice barriers? And be like, oh, all ice barriers need to be competitive is an ice barrier pendulum monster, and it's like, well, that doesn't really make any sense. And I'm seeing this trend a lot now with link monsters for the similar reasons, and I can kind of see why. A lot of players that play casually just think that everyone is playing the newest summoning mechanic in every single extra deck. Therefore, the way to fix archetypes is just give them a link monster, whatever. But I think that that's not quite what I want. When the Blue Eyes support from Legendary Collection Kaiba was first leaked to be happening, not the actual effects yet, but when we got the announcement that there would be Blue Eyes support, a lot of people said that they wanted a link monster. I didn't want a link monster. I wanted a card that increased their consistency, and that's kind of what they got. And I am really happy that they didn't get a link monster, because I feel like King of D and Dragon Ravel Rhapsody can help out Blue Eyes a lot more than pretty much any regularly powered link monster could have ever helped out that deck. But in today's video, we're going to talk about why link monsters don't just automatically fix bad strategies. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're going to say, oh, Doug, what about Spyral Double Helix? That fixed a bad deck. While that is kind of true, I do want to mention a couple things, and we can kind of take these lessons and apply them to other decks, and if a link monster will fix them. So first off, Spirals actually did see some competitive success, not only splashed into Zodiac decks, but also just as a standalone strategy. There were multiple regional tops with Spirals leading up before Double Helix came out, which shows that those cards were pretty darn good just by themselves, even without Double Helix. Now, why is Double Helix so good in that deck? Well, Double Helix is good because the Spiral cards just by themselves are very powerful. If you look at cards like Spiral Resort, that card's ridiculous. It's a field spell that prevents targeting, searches a card every turn, and the downside, the maintenance cost, is actually an upside. Oh, and none of it is once per turn, so if you have multiple copies, or if copies get destroyed, you can just keep going. Spiral Quick Fix is under the same sort of blanket here, where it has a ton of ridiculous now once per turn effects, and that makes it really darn stupid. Even Spiral Sleeper seems like a pretty crazy card on paper. So all these cards sort of give Spirals a really good backbone, so when they eventually get a card like Double Helix, which is a very good link monster, don't get me wrong, but Double Helix wouldn't be that good if you put it in a deck like Ice Barriers or a deck like Flame Veils. It has to already have a backbone of good cards to be a great card, and that's kind of what I'm talking about here. If you give Crystal Beasts like a Spiral Double Helix, well, does that instantly wreck the metagame? Not so much, because it doesn't have a card like Spiral Resort, it doesn't have a card like Spiral Quick Fix, it doesn't have all those types of cards, and it especially doesn't have a card like Spiral Master Plan, which is like the most important part of Double Helix, is that you can special summon the Master Plan and then make another link monster and then search some stuff. That's pretty insane, and most decks don't have access to those cards. So what ends up happening is that if you give a bad deck, or a quote-unquote bad deck, a lesser popular deck or lesser played deck, when you give those decks link monsters that don't really do anything or aren't completely overpowered, because obviously if you give any deck a link monster that says when you summon this thing, special summon 5 cards from your deck and draw 6 cards, that's obviously going to be good, but that's not something that Konami would make. They're going to make cards like Double Helix, which are good in their own right, but aren't necessarily good good in every deck if they just put them in there. So what ends up happening, and what we kind of saw happen in the Link of Rain set, is you can give a whole bunch of decks like Ritual Beasts and Evil Swarms and Heretics, you can give them Link monsters, and actually in all three of those cases, they're pretty good Link monsters. Maybe not so much in the case of Evil Swarms, but at least the Ritual Beast one is pretty darn good in Ritual Beast, and the Heretic one seems pretty cool, but that doesn't break any of those decks, which kind of is proving my point that the actual deck that it's supporting has to be good enough for the Link monster to make a big difference. And we can kind of already look at other types of cards and see this happening. I mean, think of a card like Spellbook of Judgment. Holy crap, that card is amazing. It gives like a +1,000,000, special summons a guy, it's searchable by 1,000 things. But why is Spellbook of Judgment good? Is it good just by itself? Well, not really, because Spellbook of Judgment is only as good as the thing that it can special summon and the thing that it can search. Because if Spellbook of Judgment was searching all normal monsters or all random spells, that wouldn't be very good. But the fact that it's searching cards like Spellbook of Fate and Spellbook of Secrets and Spellbook of Master and Spellbook of Eternity, the fact that it's searching good cards and the fact that it can special summon good cards like Jowgen makes Spellbook of Judgment obviously very, very overpowered. But just giving a deck that's not that good a card like Spellbook of Judgment doesn't instantly break the format. We can look at a card like Crystal Abundance, which is absolutely ridiculous and instantly wins the game when it resolves. That doesn't just make Crystal Beasts good. Even right now when Crystal Beasts have 6, well, I guess it's technically 2 different cards, but 3 copies of both of them in the recent Pegasus pack, whatever that was called. Even if we look at those 6 cards being added to the standard Crystal Beast deck, which increase the consistency by a ton, and those cards are really good and can help set up Crystal Abundance, you're not seeing Crystal Beast being played anywhere. Even in one of the most wide open formats that we've had in years, you still aren't seeing Crystal Beast topping any regionals or even getting their invite out of regionals, specifically because they don't have the same backbone that Spyrals have, which is it's really just proving the point. You can't just give a deck whatever the newest mechanic is and expect them to be good. It simply doesn't work. And we can look at some other cases as well. I think the Weather Painter, what are they called now? They're not, someone like corrected me on the last video I talked about them. They're not called Weather Painters anymore. They're called something slightly different. But if you look at the Weather Painter Link monster, that card's crazy. It's basically a better Herald of Perfection that gains you advantage if you have like a Macrocosmos on the board. That card's crazy, but you don't see Weather Painters topping any regionals just because those cards simply aren't good enough, even with an overpowered Link monster. But I think in many cases, these decks aren't even getting overpowered Link monsters, they're just getting average or slightly above average Link monsters, and even with those slightly above average Link monsters, they simply aren't good enough to compete. So how can we actually fix legacy decks? Well, we can look at some of the best legacy support. I think one of my favorite examples on a card that I've used a lot, we'll talk about 2. So Blade Accelerator Reload is a trap card that instantly made Volcanics go from basically the biggest laughingstock of the TCG to a competent rogue deck that not only got several regional tops, but also a YCS top, or 2. Yeah, 2 YCS tops, I believe. And that's pretty exciting. That wasn't a Pendulum card. I believe that was, yeah, that was released when Pendulums were out. That wasn't a Pendulum card. A Pendulum card would not have made Volcanics very good, but a trap card with 2 awesome effects, well, that makes Volcanics pretty darn good when you put it in context of the rest of the deck. And then the other example here is Totally Awesome. Now, I know what you're thinking, well, Doug, isn't that an extra deck card? That's kind of what you're talking about against. Well, yes, it is an extra deck card, but it was released when Pendulums were out, so years after Exceed Monsters came out, and that really made a huge difference in Frogs because it gave them a win condition. But if you give Frogs a Pendulum monster in that time, does that make a huge difference? Not really. I mean, they really needed Toad. They needed an Exceed monster. Even if you gave them, I mean, think about it. If Toad was like a Link monster, that wouldn't work. You wouldn't have the detaching effect. You would only have 2 of the effects, not 3 of the effects. So you wouldn't have the detached, you special summon from deck. And then Toad simply isn't as good. You can't just make a Link monster version of Toad and expect it to instantly be good if you only gave it the negation effect and if you only gave it the add back effect. Basically then you just have a Mistar Boy with an added negation effect. That doesn't work. But also Toad doesn't work unless Dupe Frog, Swap Frog, and Rodent Toadin exist. All those cards are fantastic, and Toad simply isn't good enough by itself, even though it is very good. Sort of similar to the Weather Painter Link monster, you can see sort of the same negation and advantage gaining effects there. Just because Toad is a good card doesn't mean that frogs are a good deck. However, when you give them Swap Frog, when you give them Dewfrog, when you give them Rodent Totem, then suddenly you have a pretty powerful rogue contender with a variety of YCS and regional tops. Anyway, though, that is pretty much going to wrap up my discussion. What do you guys think? Am I completely wrong here? Please try to keep things in context of cards Konami would actually print, because like I said, if you give any deck a Link monster that is like a +10 immediately when you summon it, yeah, obviously it's going to be pretty good. But try to think of cards along the same vein of Spyral Double Helix, something that's not completely absurd, something that maybe just like special summons a guy from the deck or adds a card to your hand. Does that completely break sort of these old school decks or rogue decks that you've been playing? Maybe not, maybe it does. Just let me know in the comments. And yeah, hopefully by the time this is uploaded, the FA cards will be revealed. I'll do a video on them when those ever get leaked or whatever. I guess it doesn't count as leaked when the official Yu-Gi-Oh page is doing it. Anyway, though, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.